For more on all the developments from NATO, including the latest on Ukraine, I'm joined now by two guests from London, Russian political analyst Alexander Nekrassov. He's a former advisor to the Kremlin and a former investigative journalist. And here in the studio is Kurt Volker. He's a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and heads the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University. I want to thank both of you for joining us. Just heard Richard Bestick's piece, Tom Barton's as well, this 4,000 strong strike force. Let's start there, and I'm going to start with Alexander. I've got to ask you, how do you think this is going to go over in Moscow?
Well, first of all, I think in Moscow they will understand that NATO has not learned any lessons from the disastrous Iraqi war, the war in Iraq, from the disastrous Libyan invasion, from the Syrian campaign, and now we're seeing NATO making all the same mistakes in Ukraine. Now, we must understand that this is a situation when we are looking at 28 countries led by America, most of which are bankrupt financially and economically. They need to find a way out of this situation. And that is why we hear all these talk about, Russia being an enemy, a danger, about aggression in Ukraine. This happens always when there's a serious problem with the economy.
Okay,
now,
Alexander, let's leave it there, and I want Kurt to have a chance to jump in here. He's saying that this is all about ginning things up to get more money for NATO. I want to get your thoughts.
Not at all. NATO over the last 15, 20 years has been slashing its defense budgets, reducing its military capability, looking at crisis management missions far away, such as in Afghanistan, helping the African Union transport troops. Furthest thing from NATO's mind was looking at aggression in Europe. But unfortunately, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the troops, the artillery, the tanks, support for the insurgency that's there, NATO is feeling it needs to respond. I actually think the disappointment from this NATO summit is that NATO's response is limited to defending NATO member states that are already in the alliance, Baltic states, Poland, and so forth, without really doing anything about Russia's invasion.
But are they reneging on the agreement that they made with Russia in 1971?
Not at all. They actually just have to read the agreement to see it. It starts off by saying, in the current and foreseeable security environment, this is 1997 we're talking about, no one thought then that Russia would be invading its neighbors, Georgia 6 years ago, Ukraine this year. It also says that we don't foresee a need for additional permanent stationing of significant numbers of combat troops. Well, these are not significant numbers, they're not permanent stationing, they're not additional to what was there in 97. We're at levels far below what was 97.
Well, Alexander, what are your thoughts? Do you think that the NATO is stepping away from the agreement it made with Russia some time ago?
Well, NATO has been stepping from all sorts of agreements unsigned and signed since the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was never a plan for NATO not to spread eastwards. It was always on the cards. And I strongly object to the suggestion that Russia has invaded Ukraine just because it decided to grab some territory. America is guilty of supporting and financing an armed coup in Kiev. They will not get away with this. They cannot tell us, like a propaganda machine, we had nothing to do with this. America was there, Senator McCain was there, the CIA was there and still there. They're funding those thugs who are killing Russian people, ethnic Russians in the eastern Ukraine. And I absolutely don't understand how they can keep straight faces and lie to their people, to Russia, to the United Nations, and continue this propaganda. I'm always asking Americans, what about the MH17, the plane that went down over Ukraine, and there was a massive propaganda campaign against Russia, blaming it, and now there's silence. Russia is asking, where's the evidence? Show us. And it's kept away. Why? Because it's not Russia, and it's not the rebels there. It's the Ukrainian thugs armed with American weapons who shot it down.
Well, Kurt, I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, it's so rich a comment there, it's hard to know what to pick out to reject. It's all wrong. From what we've seen with our own eyes, if we remember back what happened in January and February, the Yanukovych government was firing on protesters in Kiev. The parliament voted to remove Yanukovych from power.
But killing less Ukrainians than the current government has done. I mean,
let's go through it. So first off, the parliament votes to remove Yanukovych from power. He flees the country. The parliament elects a new government, and the president then gets an election in May where he takes office. So this is not a military coup. That's one part of it. The other part is when you saw what happened with the Malaysian airliner, where it was shot down, who was in control of the territory, what weapons were used, the telemetry of all of this. It was clearly fired by people inside Ukrainian territory where the insurgents controlled it, with equipment that really only Russia could have provided.
Let me ask you this, and I want to get Alexander to join in on this one. An independent research organization in Canada published a piece in 2009. It was entitled "Encircling Russia, U.S. NATO Military Bases in Eastern Europe," and it kind of counts out all the different bases in Bulgaria and Romania. And it had a quote from Putin, who said at the time, "A new base in Bulgaria, another in Romania, a site in Poland, radar in the Czech Republic. What are we supposed to do? We cannot just observe all of this." Do you see the point from Russia that all of a sudden it looks as though it is getting encircled, and NATO really was founded in a way to keep Russia down?
Well, NATO was founded because the Soviet Union had an expansionist policy of both not only imposing communism in its own country, but imposing governments on Central and Eastern Europe. When those countries finally became free with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the withdrawal of Soviet forces, they were very concerned to establish democracy, market economy, and security. And in order to establish security so future generations wouldn't have to worry about what was going to happen to them, would they be invaded again, they wanted to become a part of NATO. NATO, meanwhile, transformed away from the Cold War focus because Russia was not a threat in the 1990s. That was not part of NATO's calculus. But NATO was dealing with the war in Bosnia, and we had to move troops there, so we had some temporary bases in Hungary. The war in Afghanistan, where NATO then took over responsibility for ISAF, so we had the base in Bulgaria in order to do transit flights to get to Afghanistan. Missile threats from countries like Iran, where a rogue missile here or there, you'd want to protect a European city against that. Missile defense was never about Russia. Russia has thousands of missiles. You could never possibly defend against all of those, so it wasn't even a consideration. But the idea that the Iranians might fire a nuclear-tipped warhead or a biological or chemical-tipped one, you'd want to be able to take that out of the sky. So that's where NATO has been coming from. I'll grant that Russia has always had this paranoia about NATO, but there has been never any kind of aggressive action coming out of NATO. It's always played a defense role or a crisis management role.
Alexander, is Russia paranoid, or should they be concerned about encroachment?
Well, I was listening to this propaganda drivel, and I was smiling. You probably noticed that. First of all, America has started more wars than any other country after the last big war. America is conducting covert operations and has never stopped conducting covert operations even after the Cold War ended. And so when we are talking about the 1990s, it was a disgusting interference into the Russian affairs. $20 trillion was stolen with the help of American banks from the Russian economy. And this was a covert war. It never ended. The Cold War really never ended in the minds of the Americans, politicians. So to say that America, this democracy and so on, we can look at Iraq, we can look at Libya, we can look at Syria, we can look at Afghanistan, we can look at Kosovo. Everywhere where America interferes, there's chaos, there's murder, and there's an asset grab. And you know why America is so upset now? Because Russia foiled its asset grab in Syria, and then the asset grab in Ukraine. And they went nuts. And this is why we saw these people gather in Wales and threatening Russia. They don't have the balls, NATO, to take on Russia militarily. They can only go after small countries and by the way, lose, as we saw in Afghanistan. So what we are witnessing
let me stop there because we're just Alexander. I'm sorry, Alexander. We're just about out of time. So I want to pose one last question to both of you: is peace possible in Ukraine?
Of course, it's possible. It's going to require Russia to withdraw its forces and to allow the Ukrainians to reestablish control of their own country. Right now, Russia's not doing that because it believes that it can successfully disrupt Ukraine, break away this territory, just as it already annexed Crimea. I think Russia's going to have to feel a bit more pushback, and then hopefully they will withdraw, and then we can reestablish some stability.
Alexander, you get the last word. Is peace possible?
No, it's not. Until America is interfering, until the CIA and FBI are openly operating there, until American mercenaries are operating in the East, no chance.
Alexander, joining us from London. Kurt here in the studio. We're going to leave it there. Thank you both. Lively discussion, no doubt about it. Appreciate it.
Thank you.